Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to my channel. In this video, we absolutely must go over the second part of the 2020 annual meeting. The annual meeting, for those of you who don't know, is one of the most auspicious events in the Jehovah's Witness calendar. It's a very exclusive event where basically only the top brass of the organization attend, but especially in recent years, because they have almost unlimited video production capability, the organization's been recording these events and chopping them up into various different parts and letting ordinary rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses watch these events on the jw.org website. We recently had part 2 released on jw.org. It's actually a shorter file, so just over 32 minutes. So not that much to talk about, but there were one or two interesting talking points which we'll get into. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
We are happy to continue with the annual meeting program. We now have with us Brother Len Myers, a helper to the writing committee, who will conduct an interview with wives of branch committee members in the United States. Brother Myers, please.
The accounts of faithful women are found throughout the Bible. One faithful Christian sister is mentioned by the Apostle Paul at Romans chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. There he mentions Phoebe, who proved herself to be a defender of many, including Paul. Today, we're blessed to be able to get to know faithful Christian sisters who share something unique. All of them are wives of brothers who serve as members of the United States Branch Committee.
I think this is an effort by the organization to appear less patriarchal and less sexist and more inclusive of women. But actually, all they're doing is showing kind of how misogynist and patriarchal they are, because they're interviewing not just any women, they're not just inviting any woman from a Jehovah's Witness congregation who's in the rank and file, for example, to just step forward and share their experience of what it's like on the ground to be an ordinary Jehovah's Witness. No, we're going to be treated to interviews with wives of branch committee members in the United States. That's how exclusive this little club is. So these women are worthy of our attention, not because of who they are, but because of who they married.
Sister Snyder, we'd like to get to know more about you. Can you please first tell us how you got the truth?
I was introduced to the truth by my parents, and Jehovah used the example of my sister and the nurturing love of older ones in the congregations to draw me to him.
Then how did you start in the full-time ministry and then into Bethel service?
Well, it was a bit of a test. When I was in my late teens, a friend of mine died, and I couldn't understand why Jehovah would allow this to happen to such a kind person. So an elderly pioneer sister encouraged me to do deeper research on the issue of universal sovereignty. And this not only comforted me, but it caused me to reevaluate my priorities and to see if I truly believed Jehovah would take care of me if I really put him first. So I started pioneering, put college on hold, and it wasn't long before I was broke and the rent was coming due. And so the next meeting, I quietly put my last $50 in the contribution box and thought, that's it, I'm done, doesn't work, I'm going back to school. But that evening, I learned that Matthew 6:33 is undeniably true. Jehovah surprised me and cared for all my needs from the most unlikely sources, and he hasn't stopped caring for me since.
Oh, well, how nice for you, Sister Snyder. Jehovah is caring for you. He didn't care especially about your friend who died, did he? A friend of mine died, and I couldn't understand why Jehovah would allow this to happen to such a kind person. And that never gets answered, by the way. We just get this vague explanation that it's something to do with Jehovah's sovereignty. But bottom line, did Jehovah care for this friend of Sister Snyder's who died? Difficult to argue that Jehovah cared for the needs of 7,500 Jehovah's Witnesses who have so far died due to the coronavirus pandemic, according to the organization's own figures. And that number has almost certainly risen since we were given it. But, oh, don't worry, Sister Snyder's okay, so everything's fine. Seriously, viewers, I do talk about this now and then, but it keeps resurfacing, so I keep having to talk about it. What arrogance! This is the arrogance that you need to have if you take seriously this idea that not only is there a supreme being who's taking an interest in humanity, but also that supreme being is looking out for you in particular. He's interested in you. He's interested in your success, your prosperity, how much money you've got in your bank account, whether or not you need to go through higher education. But he sat through the Holocaust with his arms folded. I once thought that way. I obviously didn't connect it to the Holocaust, but I allowed myself to be so arrogant and self-absorbed that I thought the creator of the cosmos was interested in my particular well-being. I had an experience when I was actually, ironically, going through college as a Jehovah's Witness. I went to college for 2 years. I was crossing the road to get the bus into college, and I got hit by a van that was not just any van, but one of those armor-plated vans that collects money from ATMs and that kind of thing. It would have been driving about 30, 40 miles an hour, and it hit me, and in front of everyone who was on the bus, I'm told, because I don't remember too much about the exact impact, but I'm told I went flying. And amazingly, despite being in that sort of accident, I was able to just pick myself up off the road and get on the bus with everyone looking at me as though they'd seen a ghost. And the bus driver said, "You went flying, and here you are on my bus." And that sort of, I played around with that incident in my head for years afterwards, and I was thinking, that surely was God's intervention. How can I explain that sort of thing? I now look back on the whole thing and think, well, if that was God's intervention, again, where was he for the Holocaust? Where was he during the massacres in Bosnia or 9/11, or where was he during the various atrocities committed by ISIS? Where was he for all of that? To believe in divine intervention on a personal basis over such menial things as how much money is on your bank balance and whether you're able to pioneer or not, while ignoring all of the suffering, all of the 9 million children who die every year before they can even reach the age of 6 years old. It requires you to either just not be thinking properly, which I think is the case with most people who think that way. They just don't think it through. Or it requires breathtaking self-importance and breathtaking arrogance. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Quite apart from the fact that she's sending a message to countless young people who'll be watching this. Oh, you don't need college. You don't need higher education. And if you've only got $50 left on your person, if that's your last $50, that needs to go in the contribution box. I mean, there's multiple layers of cringe in all of this. I realize this. But for me, it's just the arrogance on display here of assuming that you're that important. You are so important in the grand scheme of things, in the unraveling of God's plan, that your bank balance matters more than millions of victims of various atrocities going through history. I also found it interesting where she said,
The next meeting, I quietly put my last $50 in the contribution box.
So the next meeting, I quietly put my last $50 in the contribution box, as though, I was doing it in a very inconspicuous way. I quietly put my $50 in the contribution box. Well, it's not so quiet now, is it? Millions of Jehovah's Witnesses are hearing all about how wonderful you are, Sister Snyder, and how faithful you were to put that money in the contribution box. So I'm not sure whether you did it loudly or quietly is frankly relevant in any way.
Now, what assignments have you enjoyed at Bethel?
I've enjoyed housekeeping, really enjoyed a lot of assignments within transportation department, and I was one of thousands who worked on the Warwick and Tuxedo construction projects.
Now, as the wife of a branch committee member, you have a demanding schedule. Can you explain one challenge?
Well, like most wives of good shepherds, I would love to have more time with my husband.
That's understandable. So what practical things have you done to deal with that challenge?
Well, prayer, study, and meditation has reminded me that we're at spiritual war. And we're at war, our priorities have to change. So I can't long for ideal circumstances, although they're coming quickly. Right now, it's about advancing pure worship. And while it's important to maintain a healthy and close relationship with Troy, my primary joy should be in Jehovah.
Now, with challenges come blessings. What's one blessing you enjoy as the wife of a branch committee member?
Increased peace that comes from having complete confidence in how Jehovah directs and blesses the decisions his organization makes through the governing body. If I were not married to a branch committee member, I may never have known just how much the brothers rely on Jehovah's Spirit and how much time they spend, long periods of time in prayer, and how much they deeply, deeply love the friends. So I'm embarrassed about how much worrying I've done in the past about these things, but now it's a lot easier to just be supportive and listen, obey, and be blessed.
Listen, obey, and be blessed. Good grief. Well, I think you should be embarrassed, Sister Snyder, but not about how much worrying you've done in the past about these things. There's multiple layers of embarrassment there, mostly the fanaticism that you're displaying. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to be too harsh here, because let's remember, Sister Snyder isn't in full control of her own mind at the moment. That's kind of self-evident when you look at the sort of phony, contrived way in which all of this is coming across. None of this looks, for me, particularly heartfelt. She's like a puppet on strings as far as I'm concerned. She's saying what she's expected to say. We're never going to hear, in answer to the question, what's it like being the wife of a branch committee member? Oh, it's a bit rubbish, really. I don't really like it. I'd rather not be the wife of a branch committee member. She's going to gush about all of this. So let's cut Sister Snyder a bit of slack. However, we can learn a lot here, and we're learning all about, again, how fanatical this organization is. Sister Snyder says,
We're at spiritual war. And we're at war, our priorities have to change. So I can't long for ideal circumstances, although they're coming quickly.
We're at spiritual war. and we're at war, so our priorities have to change. So I can't long for ideal circumstances, although they're coming quickly. By ideal circumstances, she means I have to forego having a proper relationship with my husband. I would like to spend more time with my husband, who's a branch committee member and therefore is very busy, no doubt putting out fires caused by the mishandling of child abuse in the United States. I'd love to have more time with him, but I'm at war. I'm at war with Satan's system of things. So it would be selfish of me to think about what my needs are as a wife. It would be selfish of me to expect to be able to spend time with the person I'm married to. I just have to go along with it all, because I know that at least when the paradise comes, I'll get to spend some time with my husband. That's pretty much what she just said. That's the level of fanaticism you need, especially if you're going to make it in the higher echelons of this organization. I love as well the question, what's one blessing you enjoy as the wife of a branch committee member? Again, highlighting just how exclusive all of this is. I mean, this isn't something that ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses, especially ordinary Jehovah's Witness women, can relate to. They're cherry picking from among the top brass, and they're expecting us all to nod along and think, oh yeah, I can relate to that. And they say, you know, what do you enjoy as a branch committee member? And she says,
if I were not married to a branch committee member, I may never have known just how much the brothers rely on Jehovah's Spirit, and how much time they spend, long periods of time in prayer, and how much they deeply, deeply love the friends.
If I were not married to a branch committee member, I may never have known just how much the brothers rely on Jehovah's Spirit, the brothers meaning the governing body, and how much time they spend, long periods of time in prayer, and how much they deeply, deeply love the friends. If I weren't married to a branch committee member, I probably have no idea just how devout and just how loving and just how prayerful the governing body are. But because of this unique privilege that I have to have married a branch committee member, I've been rescued with this knowledge, because I get to rub shoulders with the governing body. I get to see how much they pray. Yeah. Whenever the governing body members are praying, Sister Snyder's there in the corner of the room, like with a stopwatch. How many minutes will it be this time that Brother Morris has got his eyes closed? How can you possibly know? How can you possibly know, Sister Snyder, how much they're praying? No one can know that. For all you know, Tony Morris has just fallen asleep in a drunken stupor. But apparently Sister Snyder knows that these men pray, and she knows that they really, really, really love the brothers, because that's something you can only really know when you're the wife of a branch committee member.
As you look back on your rich spiritual life in Jehovah's service, is there an experience you can share with us?
We were visiting a small branch in a developing country that had been ravaged by decades of civil war. I'd never seen poverty like that before. And one evening, I went into the dining room to gather dinner for us. But before getting the dinner, I stopped and talked to a lovely young brother. But at one point, I turned around and noticed that all the food had been taken. And I said, "There's no more food." Now, this young brother hadn't eaten either, but he just shrugged and said, "It's just hunger," and continued zealously talking about his assignment. Now, this brother was a commuter, very thin, and so it was likely that he might not eat that night or maybe even the next morning. But the way his face glowed when he talked about his assignment. It was clear that his joy was not based on anything physical or the lack of anything physical. So I really treasure this lesson because it's made me want to more appreciate what I do have currently and to imitate his example and focusing on what's truly important.
And I think you told me that he did get some food that night, so we're happy about that. Thanks for letting us get to know you and for sharing that experience.
He might not have had any food, but he did get food. Wow. I mean, again, without wanting to labor the point too much, this is the annual meeting. This is one of the most auspicious, if not the most auspicious event on the Jehovah's Witness calendar. This is the time to shine for the governing body and for Jehovah's organization. They're wheeling out not just rank and file believers, not just even ordinary Bethelites who haven't married into positions of authority. They're wheeling out this extremely exclusive group of women who are important because of who they've married. And the most compelling story that Sister Snyder has when she's asked to deliver a charming anecdote is, once we were visiting a poor country and I was in the line in the dining room engrossed in conversation with this charming chap who was talking all about his job. And as we were talking, we didn't notice that there was actually no food on the table that we were in the line for. And when I noticed, I said, "Oh, look, there's no food." And the guy said, "Oh, it's just hunger." And he carried on talking about his assignment. That's the best story. In all her years of serving in the organization, of rubbing shoulders with the governing body, apparently to the extent where she is an authority on how much they pray and to what extent they love the brothers. Despite all of this privileged access to the inner workings of Jehovah's organization, when the spotlight's on her and she's asked to deliver an anecdote, that's the best she's got. I was in a dining room once with someone who was hungry. He seemed quite enthusiastic about his job, so that was very encouraging. Oh dear. What is the relevance of that? How is that in any way interesting or meaningful or something that we can derive anything significant from? All we've really learned from that experience is that Jehovah's organization isn't very efficient at feeding Bethelites. That's the lesson I'm taking away from that. Because even though he apparently got fed in the end, there was a very real risk that he wouldn't get fed. And his attitude was, "Oh, it's just hunger. It doesn't matter whether I'm starving, as long as I'm serving Jehovah's organization." And isn't that the point of everything when it comes to being one of Jehovah's Witnesses? Your own needs come second. Your very life, in fact, comes second. The extent to which you are receiving nutrients into your body comes second when it comes to your privilege of serving Jehovah.
As teenagers, a pioneer couple assisted us when we temporary or vacation pioneered, as it was called then. That led me to want to regular pioneer after high school. However, after graduating, I started working full-time. It was at a district convention where the point was made, if you're not pioneering, tell Jehovah why. Well, I really didn't have a good reason, so I started making plans to work part-time. It was in September of 1980 when I realized my goal of regular pioneering.
So we've now been introduced to Sister Cheryl Georges, again, the wife of a branch committee member. These are apparently the women that we need to be listening to in the organization, those who have married into positions of prominence. And Sister Georges is relating how she came to be involved in the pioneer work. Jehovah's Witnesses view pioneer work as full-time service, or as it's described there, full-time ministry, so that if a pioneer stops pioneering to go and work in Bethel, their full-time service just continues. They're just no longer doing it in the preaching work. They're instead doing it in Bethel. So full-time service is anything where someone is either pioneering or working in Bethel, so long as their priority essentially is serving the organization. But I just found it interesting that Sister Georges relates how she went to a convention
where the point was made, if you're not pioneering, tell Jehovah why.
And the point was made, if you're not pioneering, tell Jehovah why. That for me describes almost every circuit assembly or district or regional convention that I went to growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. It was always, if you're not pioneering, you should be. If you're not pioneering, are you really putting Jehovah first? Or as she says here, are you willing to explain to Jehovah why you're not pioneering? Because a pioneer is someone who is arranging their affairs so that they can make service to Jehovah their priority. If you're not pioneering and you're blaming it on your living arrangements, on your job, on the way your life is configured, then you need to reconfigure your life so that you're doing things properly, so that you're putting in those 70 hours per month, which is required for pioneers, 70 hours per month of your volunteer time spent recruiting new converts. That's what Jehovah is expecting of you. I just think that was worth highlighting because it shows the enormous pressure that's put on Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not just a case of do the minimum, do an hour each month, do 10 hours each month. Yes, you can get by doing that. You can go for years or decades without too many questions being asked if you are only doing the minimum or the average for your congregation. But you will always, especially as a young person, be faced with this pressure to commit 70 hours of your time every month to recruiting new converts as a regular pioneer.
What good habits did you form early in life that help you now as you support your husband?
Growing up, my mother taught us to be content and to share whatever we had. One Watchtower article stated, "True contentment comes from loving and being loved." We grew up in a loving family, and then learning about Jehovah and his love as I grew older helped me to find contentment in Jehovah's service. So whatever assignment I have, I try to be content and view any differences as an opportunity for me to learn about the various aspects, unique personalities, and qualities of my brothers and sisters.
What utter hypocrisy. And again, I'm going to try not to be too harsh on Sister Georges. She's doing what's expected of her. She's sticking to the script. She's making sure she presents well as the wife of a branch committee member, and I'm sure she's making her husband very proud in the process. She's not in full control of what she's saying here. Hopefully one day she'll wake up and she'll look back in horror at the part she's playing in promoting this organization. But let's be honest, what she's just said there is utter hypocrisy. Apparently, true contentment comes from loving and being loved. She says,
We grew up in a loving family, and then learning about Jehovah and his love as I grew older helped me to find contentment in Jehovah's service.
we grew up in a loving family, and then learning about Jehovah and his love as I grew older helped me to find contentment in Jehovah's service. So it's all about love, is it? Being a Jehovah's Witness. It's all about loving and being loved, especially in a Jehovah's Witness family, right up to the moment where you stop believing. Or right up to the moment where you, have sex with a consenting adult to whom you're not married. Then that love quickly stops. Then you get dropped like a ton of bricks. You are ejected from this loving family and treated as though you're dead. That's the love that never fails that she's referring to. So sorry, Sister Georges, I can't give you good marks there for adequately reflecting what the Jehovah's Witness experience is. It seems there you're living somewhat in denial. Either that or you're willingly misrepresenting what this religion is all about. My experience of this religion is that it's anything but loving. It's characterized by conditional love, where the extent to which you are loved, even by members of your own family, is entirely dependent on your loyalty to the organization and your willingness to put their requirements first.
I began regular pioneering in the Pasadena, California congregation after I graduated from high school in 1962.
And how did that lead to Bethel service?
I served in a few other areas where the need was great, in New Mexico, Northern California, a special pioneer assignment in Iowa, and then a small congregation in Mississippi. Tom was a Brooklyn Bethelite, and he came down to Mississippi to dedicate a Kingdom Hall in May 1981. We met. 7 months later, we were married, and we were accepted to serve as a couple at Bethel.
Now, is there a particular experience you'd like to share with us?
When I was special pioneering in Iowa, I married a brother who was a pioneer and then became an elder, and so I continued in the congregation as a regular pioneer. After several years, he became an apostate, and he tried to encourage me to go with him, but I refused. The elders made great efforts to help him to recover, but he was persistent in carrying out his course. So in time, he separated from me and ended the marriage. But I felt Jehovah's support in so many ways. One in particular was a couple who would call me often, and they would have me to their home, and they never wanted me to feel alone. Then another blessing came later when I moved to Mississippi, and I became partners with a sister who was 20 years older than me. She had been in the 7th class of Gilead, and she had been special pioneering for 30 years. So you can imagine she was a tremendous help to me. More blessings came later when I married Tom and began serving at Bethel. So feeling Jehovah's support at a difficult time and experiencing his blessings is unforgettable.
Sister Chiki, thank you so much for sharing that experience with us.
Yes, thank you, Sister Chiki, for that. Wow. Again, what an interesting insight into what this organization is all about. In a way, I suppose it's good that they're ignoring the rank and file. They're ignoring ordinary members of the religion and focusing purely on those that made it high up the ladder, those who married into positions of prominence, which is what we're getting here, interviews with wives of branch committee members, because this is showing how fanatical you need to be to last in this organization and indeed prosper in it, so that you can get these privileges of service. Although I'm not sure simply being married to, a high-ranking Bethelite is necessarily a privilege, but I'm sure that's how they see it. Anyway, talk about fanaticism. Oh yes, my husband became an apostate and he tried to encourage me to go with him. Well, how is that in any way surprising, Sister Chiki? You were married to someone who came to the conclusion that the religion that you were both in was not true. And you were expecting him to not try and persuade you. You were expecting him to think, oh, I'll let my wife continue wasting her time, lots and lots of time, because she was a special pioneer. I'll continue letting her spend over 100 hours per month. I think 120, 130 hours per month, recruiting people into an organization that isn't true. That's what you expected your husband to do, was it, Sister Cheeky? Is it not more likely, and indeed understandable, if he loved you, that he would try to persuade you, that he would present you with reasons as to why he had taken this dramatic step of apostatizing from his religion? Isn't that totally understandable? Despite how you're trying to frame it. Oh, he tried to encourage me to go with him. He loved you, or at least he loved you enough to try and share his revelations with you, or try to help you understand that you were being used and exploited to quite some degree as a special pioneer. Thankfully, I refused. I wouldn't listen to any of his reasons. I refused to see what the other side of the argument is regarding my religion. I stuck my head in the sand like a loyal follower of Jehovah's organization and refused to see the other side of the argument. So I did good.
The elders made great efforts to help him to recover, but he was persistent in carrying out his course. So in time, he separated from me and ended the marriage.
The elders tried and failed to help him recover, but he was persistent in carrying out his course. So in time, he separated from me and ended the marriage. I'm sure there is a lot more to this story. Goodness knows what Sister Cheeky's ex-husband would have to say if we could have him on the channel, if he could recount how all of this went down. But is it just me, viewers, or is he being painted as some kind of villain here? There's no shame, frankly, in separating from someone or ending your marriage with someone who views you as worthy of destruction at Armageddon if you don't change your ways. It's sad when it happens. I mean, in my own case, I was very, very fortunate because when I realized I was in a cult, my wife obviously didn't feel the same way at first, but in time, because she isn't the sort that appreciates being lied to, and she honestly wanted to understand what my motives were, in time she ended up waking up herself. So fortunately it worked out well for me, but I can imagine in many other situations where one marriage mate wakes up to the fact that they're in a cult, it doesn't go so well and the marriage does end up fracturing. I just don't think it's fair that the way the story is told, Jehovah's Witnesses, millions of Jehovah's Witnesses will be thinking, oh, poor Sister Cheeky, her husband will probably have been this awful, awful person. And yes, he separated from her. He ended the marriage. Well, what was he supposed to do? Stay in a marriage, married to someone who thought that he was worthy of death at Armageddon? It seems that there were other people involved as well, perhaps interfering, because Sister Cheeky relates.
Was a couple who would call me often and they would have me to their home and they never wanted me to feel alone.
One couple who would call me often, I'm sure not just to talk about the weather, and they would have me to their home. They never wanted me to feel alone. So she was getting love bombed by a couple in her congregation while she was going through marital problems. She was receiving this manipulation to reinforce the way she was feeling and reinforce her decision to not look at the other side of the argument. I just find it very disingenuous and one-sided, all of this. I'd like to hear what her ex-husband has to say about all this. And isn't it interesting as well that after this marriage, she then jumps into a marriage with the branch committee member, or the chap who's now a branch committee member, who she marries having only known him for 7 months.
In May 1981, we met. 7 months later, we were married, and we were accepted to serve as a couple at Bethel.
That's a bit hasty, don't you think? Are we really encouraging young Jehovah's Witness couples to get married after only 7 months? The message here seems to be, as long as he's spiritual, as long as he's a Bethelite, as long as he's got some pedigree in Jehovah's organization, yeah, sure, marry them after 7 months. If it's anyone else, probably spend a bit more time first. Honestly, how is this a healthy approach to marriage? How is this a good message to be sending out to millions of Jehovah's Witnesses, that your partner is to be demonized if he ever stops believing, and that there's nothing wrong, it's perfectly normal to marry someone after only 7 months if he's spiritual enough?
Now we have the pleasure of hearing from another member of the governing body, Brother Garrett Loesch. He will speak on the subject, "We do not give up." Brother Loesch, we look forward to your discussion.
Some of us have been in the truth for 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, or more. During our life, we may have been confronted with various tests or challenges. Still, we did not and we do not give up the truth and our precious relationship with our Heavenly Father. Also, we do not give up preaching the Word of God. 2 Corinthians chapter 4:16 is the theme scripture I've selected for this talk. Please locate that with me. 2 Corinthians 4:16. It says, "Therefore, we do not give up. But even if the man we are outside is wasting away, certainly the man we are inside is being renewed from day to day." As it said, we do not give up. And we do not give in when it comes to temptations. 1 Peter 3:6 encourages us to not give in to fear. Deuteronomy 13:6 tells the Israelites that when a false prophet becomes active, you must not give in to him or listen to him. In the Sermon on the Mount, according to an alternate rendering, Jesus told his listeners to pray to Jehovah to not allow us to give in to temptation.
Am I the only one who's picking up a significant note of desperation in Garrett Loesch here? So we're now well underway with the 2020 annual meeting, which took place in October last year. Garrett Loesch is here with the theme, "We do not give up." And yes, it's all about telling Jehovah's Witnesses to stick at it. Doesn't matter if you've been in the organization for 40 years, 50 years, 60 years or more, you could still give in to temptation. Don't. Stick with it. We're God's one true organization. Nothing should shake you from your faith, not even if a false prophet comes along. And Jehovah's Witnesses will almost certainly be thinking, yes, he's talking about apostates here. Of course, I would never listen to what apostates have to say. They're false prophets. They lie. They're trying to mislead us. And indeed, Garrett Loesch quotes there from Deuteronomy 13, verses 6 and 8, "You must not give in to him," that's the false prophet, or listen to him. Well, what else does Deuteronomy have to say about false prophets? Some of you will know where I'm going with this. Deuteronomy 18, verse 20. If any prophet presumptuously speaks a word in my name that I did not command him to speak, or speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet must die. However, you may say in your heart, how will we know that Jehovah has not spoken the word? When the prophet speaks in the name of Jehovah and the word is not fulfilled, or does not come true, then Jehovah did not speak that word, the prophet spoke it presumptuously, you should not fear him. So it's all very well for Gerrit Loesch to be warning against false prophets. What is a false prophet? It's answered there, isn't it? You might say, who is the false prophet? Who should we be ignoring? Well, that's easy. If they prophesy something in Jehovah's name and that thing doesn't happen, then it's a false prophet and you shouldn't be afraid. That's been my message on this channel from when I first started vlogging in November 2013. That was one of the very first verses that I read out on this channel. You should not fear him. I named the video, You Should Not Fear Him, because that's exactly what we're dealing with this organization, an organization that repeatedly throughout its history has prophesied, has made predictions in Jehovah's name, and they haven't come true. And the Bible is saying there, you should not fear him. In fact, elsewhere, I think it even says worse about what should be done to false prophets. But it's all very well for Gerrit Loesch to tell Jehovah's Witnesses not to give up. The Bible itself, if you look carefully, is telling people not to be afraid, not to follow along with people who are doing exactly what Gerrit Loesch and his colleagues on the governing body are doing, namely repeatedly lying to and manipulating their followers.
Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8, that we are hard-pressed, some more than others. Please find Psalm 90, verse 10. None of us are exempt from the pressures that can cause discouragement. And it says there, the span of our life is 70 years, or 80 if one is especially strong, but they are filled with trouble and sorrow. They quickly pass by, and away we fly. Because of the pressures of life and disappointments, most of us grow weary at times. But we must remember that God never promised that we would have a problem-free life in this old system. Even in the first century, God's servants faced adversities, including persecution and poverty. Jehovah does allow his servants to be tempted and tested. For the time of the end, he also foretold earthquakes, wars, increased lawlessness, and pestilences, according to Luke 21:11. In Revelation, he foretold that a figurative horseman on a pale horse will kill a large amount of people. This happened for decades now, but started with the Spanish flu at the end of World War I, where an estimated 500 million were affected, 1/3 of mankind of that time, and about 50 million died. Satan exploits our moments of discouragement, just as a lion takes advantage of an animal when it is most vulnerable. But we will not give up.
Expanding on this idea of not giving up, Gerrit Loesch is going full doomsday, apocalyptic fear merchant on his audience, with all this nonsense about the last days, about the figurative horseman on the pale horse killing a large amount of people. His message here is, we certainly shouldn't give up now. even if we've been in the organization for many decades, because look, it's all happening. He's clearly alluding here to the current pandemic, the coronavirus, and he is suggesting that all of this began with the Spanish flu. I think you'll find, Gerrit Loesch, that there have been diseases and viruses killing large numbers of people. I'm thinking smallpox in particular, which ravaged the population of the Americas, by the way, when the first Europeans landed in the Americas. Diseases and plagues and pathogens have been killing millions of people since long before the Spanish flu. But in Gerrit Loesch's cult-addled mind, it all has to do with the last days, and it all has to do with 1914 onwards. That's all that matters. He is selling the narrative that we're in the last days and that things have never been worse. And that's why God's kingdom needs to step in, because the world's just getting worse and worse and worse. How would we possibly survive another few years if Jehovah didn't bring Armageddon and install him, Gerrit Loesch, and his immaculate quiff, along with his colleagues, Tony Morris, Stephen Lett, Jeffrey Jackson, etc., install these wise men as rulers over the entire planet? That's going to fix things. Once Gerrit Loesch is in heaven, riding around on his heavenly horse, everything's going to start getting fixed. I don't buy it. I think what we have here is, again, blatant manipulation, blatant fear-mongering. This is an organization that must know at some level that its teachings don't make sense. Because how else do you explain how readily they slip into this fear-mongering and this apocalyptic doomsday narrative? They know they're talking a load of nonsense. So the only way they can keep people in their thrall is by making sure they remain terrified.
Similarly, the words or actions of others may cause us much pain of heart. There exists the one speaking thoughtlessly as with the stabs of a sword, says Proverbs 12:18. When the thoughtless one is a Christian brother or sister, the stab wound can go deep. The human tendency may be to take offense, perhaps harboring resentment. This is especially true if we feel that we have been treated unkindly or unjustly. We may find it hard to talk to the offender. We might even deliberately avoid him or her. Weighed down with resentment, some have given up and have stopped coming to Christian meetings. How can we avoid playing into the devil's hands when others disappoint or hurt us? We must try not to harbor resentment. It can hurt us so much that we start suffering from depression. Instead of giving in to depression or aggression, take the initiative to make peace or settle matters as quickly as possible. Colossians 3:13 urges us, continue forgiving one another freely if anyone has a cause for complaint against another. We do not have to fall prey to Satan. Jehovah and Jesus are on our side. How can we find encouragement to endure? Jehovah deeply cares about those who may be discouraged. Acts 17:27 shows he's not far off from each one of us. Jehovah comforts and strengthens us through loving brothers and through his Spirit and his word.
Does he really, Gerrit Loesch? Well, what a load of hypocrisy. What we've just heard is Gerrit Loesch telling millions of Jehovah's Witnesses it's okay for us to arrange for someone to be shunned. It's okay for us to tell a mother that she shouldn't speak to her son because her son has had a consenting sexual relationship with his girlfriend. It's okay for us to separate families in that situation, but don't you dare go shunning each other if you're still believers. No matter what happens, no matter what offense there is, no matter what injustice there is, you should damn well stay on friendly terms with everyone who calls themselves one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Don't you dare shun fellow members, no matter what they do to you. That was the message here. And in the context of an organization with such an appalling track record on child abuse, this is the worst possible message they could be giving to victims. Because that's what I'm thinking of when I'm hearing this. I'm hearing Gerrit Loesch telling victims of abuse, just forgive and forget. Don't try and separate yourself from your abuser, from this hideous person who's traumatized you for life. We should all be one big happy family. We should all stick together. Certainly don't stop going to meetings. You should absolutely continue going to the meetings. That's fundamental. You need to sit in the same kingdom hall under ordinary circumstances as your abuser week in, week out, and pretend none of it's happened. That's where all of this goes. That's the end game of all of this. That toxic individuals, indeed criminals in this organization, ultimately get a free pass so long as they can convince the elders that they're sorry. Meanwhile, families are being separated. Families are being broken up over the most innocuous incidents that you can imagine. Utter hypocrisy. This is an organization with no shame whatsoever. Gerrit Loesch, as a governing body member, should know better, but he has no problem at all applying one rule to fellow believers when it comes to taking offense and suffering injustice, and another rule entirely when it comes to disfellowshipping family members. But that's about all I have to say about part 2 of the annual meeting. As I said, there were some interesting things to talk about. Look out for my rebuttal to part 3 of the 2020 annual meeting in the next week or so. But that's it. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.